There were some in Maryland. There was some discussion about what was appropriate for teachers to be able to use with families, because some families weren't able to do Zoom or found it too confusing. And then were they allowed to do FaceTime? And I think that OSEP opened up a little bit, or I don't know, was it OSEP or OSERS, but basically relaxed some of the rules to allow some families to do that. But I think more and more, at least in Maryland, they were moving toward Google Meet because of the HIPAA platform, which isn't available on Zoom, at least not yet that I'm aware of. So some of those are changing in different places.
I have a HIPAA license on Zoom that the university is paying for me for 2 years, license to do research interviews.
Oh, okay.
It's there available.
It's available. Well, some of the
but you pay.
A lot of mobility specialists have been asking questions, different questions. Some are, well, you know, everybody knows that we've got some that are working with a school system, and sometimes the school systems or the adult agency is very helpful, providing everything that they need. And other times you're the lone wolf, even though you have an employer or somebody that you're contracting with, you're expected to come up with it all on your own. And so there's been lots of questions from people about what's appropriate, how do we do it, what's the guidance, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And at the university level, are you all having discussions about these things, or? Yeah. To open up the box again from Amy Parker and Bill Kaler, those are things that I think multiple groups are trying to prepare information for to respond to the questions. I don't know that any of this can come quickly in terms of creating standards, because things are still being learned. We're still developing. We're the analogy of building the boat on the open water. That's just what we're doing. I know that there's been a lot of people who are concerned about liability, and I don't know that there's any precedents anywhere. All I have to go on are things, for instance, where an O&M has reached out to, like, Forrest T. Jones to say, are we covered, are we not covered? But I don't know that we have anything codified yet to be able to say, yes, here it is in print, that we're supported, especially because we don't have any standards for the insurance company to look at. So who do you all think should develop the standards?
I think at least my thought is that it needs to be a collaborative effort. So it's balanced to some degree. And, you know, I was reading the working group document, and a lot of it talks about scope and practice and how that relates to liability. And if we're stepping out of our scope of practice because there is no precedent for it, you know, what comes first? Like you said, the boat, which is probably a better analogy, but, you know, the cart and the horse. So they created, which I think is a decent starting document of the level of risk. You know, okay, so what's considered low risk, what's considered medium risk, what's considered high risk? You know, would you do street crossings remotely? That would probably fall under high risk. Could you do indoor familiarization? That's probably a lower risk. So I think we need to figure out, you know, what's the criteria and kind of go from there.
One of the other areas that's come up is when we have a helper, in order to mitigate risk, how do we categorize those helpers? It's one thing when we had the orientation mobility assistant platform, and there was a training rubric that went with it. We don't have that anymore, at least officially. Do we need to develop something like that? Or do we want to just come up with a simple list of, this is what the unindoctrinated person can do, the parent who may or may not know anything. This is what a paraprofessional could do who has some required training from their school district. And this is what maybe a TVI could do, who's working with that student anyway, and we're just asking them to reinforce things. What do y'all think about that?
I think my question with that, Chris, is, I mean, I'm guessing a paraprofessional isn't going to be with the student in most times if they're doing remote instruction anyways. So I'm kind of thinking that you would be training a family member most of the time. And I don't see that there's any way to do that equally, because some parents or family are going to be available and some aren't.
Here's a possible scenario where, just as an example, in Maryland, though students are not coming back just yet, one of the models to help students return is that they want to be in cohorts or pods, so that you're minimizing the number of people who contact one another each day. So even though the teacher and the paraprofessional might be with the students, the related service providers might come in remotely, so that you are there with some people, but the people who, let's say I would be visiting 18 different classrooms, I'm not doing that at the School for the Blind. I'm jumping into their classroom remotely and either working directly with a student, or for students who need support, the paraprofessional or teacher would be providing that assistance.
Okay, that makes sense.
So there's lots of, depending on how we return, or in the event that we return in different ways, there might be different ways that we interact, even though we quote unquote could be, to continue to minimize the transmission risk. That might be something that we have to look at in different ways. Has anybody had experience with adults and what some of the implications for adults, working with adults and seniors, were experiencing?
I have.
What can you share, Joanne?
Well, at this point, it's all Zoom, but there's been discussion, you know, if we return back to direct face-to-face instruction, a lot of the adults have a lot of comorbidities. So they would be considered high risk. And some of them are thinking that even if we're permitted to go back to face-to-face, their risk factors are too high. They would want to remain in a remote instructional situation. So there's been some debate that I don't think it came true yet, that some agencies are thinking of having people sign off on a waiver. You know, we take no responsibility whatsoever if you get COVID. Well, you're volunteering to have instruction here. And other people are saying, okay, we're not going to sign that because we can't, you know, release you of liability if you haven't done your due diligence, you haven't abided by CDC guidelines. You know, it's still very much in debate of what is going to or what will eventually happen. So I think I brought up more questions than answers.
Well, it's important to consider that whoever's signing the paycheck, so to speak, or that whoever's the funding source, is going to have their own rules about when things can and cannot happen, even though the instructor and the student or the traveler might be ready to begin again. If the agency is not willing to write the contract, then the client could be totally ready and want to get to their store or whatever it is, but if the contracting agency isn't willing to take that liability or that risk, then nothing happens.
Right.
And I guess that's another reason to have some set of standards or guidelines, so that we could have agencies use that as a resource for, this is what could be considered an acceptable or best practice way to continue instruction, with maybe scenarios or vignettes of, here's individual A with this type of life setting, and here's individual B with this type of condition and life setting, so that they have some idea that we've actually gone through the thought process of what can be safe, what can be done, and what do we want to hold for until we can have safe face-to-face meetings.
So this is Maggie, and I work at Leader Dog, and we've actually just graduated 6 guide dog clients. And in the next month, we're bringing in, I think, 10 more guide dog clients, and we'll be serving 9 O&M clients. So for the past month, we've been meeting people face-to-face. They do get a lot of information about COVID. We call every morning to confirm a questionnaire that they haven't been in contact with anyone in 14 days, that they're not having any signs or symptoms. And then for the most part, people are really respectful as far as wearing masks. But it is all adults, and everyone is essentially buying in and knowing what their risk is. And in most cases, we've been able to serve everybody on our waiting list that's within driving distance. But actually this next month, we're going to have a couple people who are going to fly in and come on campus.
And Maggie, have you found that people are less wanting to come? I know that some of this is built in. It's kind of, if you need to travel and you're a dog traveler, that's what you need and that's what you're ready to do. Are you finding that people are ambitious? Are they anxious? Are they resistant?
I think it's a variety of everything. And then for the people who are still really motivated to come on campus, it's just then making sure that everybody is on board to be respectful of other people's boundaries. And the way that the campus is set up, it really is set to bring people together. So there's been a lot of kind of changing the way that we do things, because all of our hallways meet in one area so that our clients congregate at the same time in the same place. So now we're having to do a lot of staggering and even calling clients down to meals, things like that. And it's definitely not the social place that it once was, but for the people who want orientation and mobility and they want guide dog travel, they're getting it. And there are only select states that will bring people in from, and that's being looked at by a task force weekly.
Are there, I haven't ever been to Leader Dog, but I'm guessing that in the past you would have put maybe 3 or 4 clients with their dogs into a van and we all go downtown and practice at different places. Has transportation changed and how you get
Yeah, transportation has changed, and then we also have a downtown building, and some of those like limitations are based on what the state limitations are. So 10 people in a building or in a space at a time. So where our downtown building at some points would even, accommodate having 40 people, different guide dog instructors, people in class, O&M, that's now limited to 10. For O&M, we are only having 1 instructor and 1 client in a vehicle at a time. And all internships have been postponed. So we won't have like our normal groups of 3.
Aggie, do they do any type of screening, like take temperatures or anything like that?
I don't think that we're taking temperatures, at least I haven't, but we're doing the questionnaire every single morning. So before I even leave my house or leave my office to go check in with someone, every single day, I'm calling them and giving them, a questionnaire, and then also confirming with them that I've also agreed to those things.
How did the youth program go this summer that was virtual?
It was actually really fun and really great. And I think that what ended up being most successful was that we didn't have to meet time. We didn't have to meet like a certain amount of time. So we were only on Zoom maybe at most 2 hours a day. So a morning session and an afternoon session. So we were able to really keep everyone really engaged. And then we also had a Facebook group that went along with it. And we had a little over half of the students participate in that. And that was really fun too. And we did a lot of like different leadership things, college readiness, guide dog readiness, and it worked out.
Did you have a different size group because it was virtual this time, or?
Yeah, and we were able to open it up. So programs at Leader Dog start at 16. And so our summer experience camp is ages 16 and 17. But this year, since it was virtual and we didn't have to meet any state regulations, we were able to open it up to 14 and 15-year-olds as well. So when it's on campus, at most we can serve 24 clients, just based on like what the rooms that we have, and then the people staying on campus, that are support staff and stuff. But this year we had 38 clients who are really active. 44 signed up, 38 that, attended most of the sessions.
Very good. Awesome. That's great. That's great. Did anybody else have success stories that you're experiencing with remote? either at university level or with travelers that you're working with?
Hi, Chris. It's Valerie.
Hey,
I work for a state agency in Virginia.
Yep.
I had worked with adults, but now I work with children birth through 21. And we've, for a little while before our numbers spiked, we were able to go out and do, I was able to go out and do functional vision and O&M assessments with the infants and just call the families and do the CDC questions. Everyone would wear PPE, and then I would come into the home and do an assessment with the family. And we've had, and probably others have had as well, higher number of families opting to homeschool their children because we are, most of the school districts are going to be virtual, at least initially. So that's been a challenge. We did, our agency paired with Easter Seals did Super Summer Camp, and that was held virtually. And that was, we did a Braille Twister game, and we had some other camp songs and some other really cool events that we did. So that was really good.
Awesome. Good. Thank you, Valerie. Others?
Hi.
Rachel?
I work with independent living clients, and a lot of the people I work with only use a landline or a flip phone, and that can be limiting. Just wanted to throw that point in there.
Well, it's a very good point, and there are some that might be in an Amish community where they don't even have those resources. So it's kind of like we're sending tactile maps with instructions. So a little bit more like the correspondence course we used to do through Hadley. If you were learning Braille and you'd send in your homework and they'd grade it and send it back to you. So there's lots of different ways that this is happening. In terms of standards, I'm hoping that part of the discussion tonight can be about what you all think should be included in standards, because it's been talked about in the OMSA group, it's been talked about in the working group through Amy Parker and Bill Kaler, and just a little bit through ACVREP, but most of the energy right now is for the time to rewrite the test has occurred. So that's where most of the focus is for ACVREP. The subject matter experts are involved in that at the moment. But in terms of beginning to develop standards, what do you all think should be part of that? What should be included?
Chris, I work for a state agency, and I have not seen anyone face-to-face since March. And it's more than likely I will not see anybody face-to-face until January. So I'm getting questions from administration as to why I can't teach beginning cane skills and sighted guide in street crossings virtually, from administration who is not familiar with O&M. They do not have a lot of experience in the blindness field, frankly, and I'm very, very uncomfortable doing that. And you know,
Would you feel more comfortable? And I don't have it. I'm just trying to explore options to understand. Would you feel more comfortable if you had, just as an example, do you work with adults or children or both?
I work with adults.
Okay, so if there were an adult, I'm just going to pick, let's say, a middle-aged adult. Let's just put them in their 30s or 40s, and they are new to visual impairment and blindness. They've just gotten a cane, but they haven't done any work with anyone yet. Would you feel comfortable if they had a family member, let's say, starting to walk up and down even just their walkway to get to their mailbox and back and forth, and then maybe beginning to walk around the block, if the family member were there and maybe holding a smartphone so you could see on video what they were doing?
I'm not sure, because more than likely they're going to end up picking up bad habits that we will have to work on breaking at some point. And that's, you know, we live in I live in a rather poor rural state. Not a lot of, especially in the eastern part of the state, a lot of people are not comfortable with the idea of using a cane. And I'm not sure that their family members would do that. You know, I'm also concerned that, you know, people are waiting so long for O&M instruction. You know, we're not allowed to see anyone. And I'm worried that there's going to be some, you know, lawsuits because people have tried to do things on their own and they're going to get hurt.
Well, there's lots of different ways of looking at this. There's the how do we keep them safe and not allow them to develop things like you had mentioned before. But there's also that, are we doing them a disservice by making them wait for nobody knows how long at this point? And this could be another 6 months or more before we're able to resume face-to-face services. And for someone who just wants to be able to get to from their bedroom to the bathroom, that seems like an awful lot of time to wait for just some basic skills. Every scenario is different. It's hard to make just one blanket statement. But looking at some scenarios that have been successful might be a way to go about that. What do you think would be helpful in terms of having support from another individual, knowing that we don't necessarily have the chance to train them ahead of time?
I would really like something to be able to present to administration to say, okay, this is what is considered best practice right now for this time frame. You know,
some of these things, I imagine by the time we get this done and published and all, it'll all be different. But my guess is also that administration may be asking us to continue with some of these ways of doing things, because for many of us who are itinerant, one of the greatest costs is travel, in terms of both just the cost of the vehicle and the fuel, but also our time. And so if there are ways to use the technology that we're being forced to use, for lack of a better way to put it, we're required to use now, can save some of that travel time and human resource time, that's a win for everybody, but we want it to be safe and productive for those that we work with. So just, I guess, when we begin to develop these standards, making sure that we're keeping that lens of understanding that what do we need now, but also when we move forward, knowing that we will likely be asked to continue in some ways doing some of these things because we have all these resources available now. In terms of other folks, whether you're working with children or early childhood or seniors, are there areas in terms of standards that you think you'd like to have? You feel like there's enough information already?
This is Laura. This is not new information by any means, but you know, throughout my time in the profession, you working in the schools, let's say, or whatever, and you want someone as an O&M, you want someone to be able to support what you're doing in the natural routines of this child's life or this adult's life. But especially for younger kids, you want this to be supported. You're not with them 24 hours a day, so you want it supported. And I have found, sorry, the clock's going. I have found that, and probably be true with everybody on this call, that one O&M specialist might be really, you know, I'm fairly loosey-goosey if I know the person who's going to be supporting my kid or adult. you know, working with OTs and PTs and stuff like that. There's some that I can role release a whole lot to. And then there were others who I didn't want involved at all, you know, but it's people, it's like that. And I feel the same way about this. Certainly personally, it would not bother me at all to have someone, for me not to be there if there's a responsible person whom I know, teaching someone to go from their bedroom to the bathroom, you know, in the case of recent vision loss or something like that. That wouldn't necessarily bother me as long as stairs weren't involved and things like that. I don't know how I'd feel. You asked the question about going to the mailbox. That's not a real big deal, but I don't know how I'd feel about that really, Chris. And I'm really fairly liberal about that kind of stuff. But I guess my point is that I think we have to be careful. I know we need to explore these things, but then I think we also have to be careful. It's kind of like me not wanting the government in my business. I don't want someone telling me where I have to stop teaching and, you know, where do we draw that line? It's like, I think Joanne said, it's, you know, teaching someone to cross a street and, or having their parent or their friend do that and us not be there. That might be really obvious that we would not do. But you know, when you start backing that line up, somebody brand new coming out, just as certified as I am, but brand new, I don't know, because I don't know about you guys, but I got a whole lot of learning and instruction and still do working in the field. Not, you know, we prepare people, as you know, Chris, we've been talking about this so much lately with the tests and stuff. We prepare people who are initially, I'm not going to say competent, but initial O&M specialists, right? So I just think it depends on the specialist. I think it depends on the client or the kid and the person who's there. I mean, I don't think O&M is rocket science, but I also don't think it's terribly intuitive sometimes. If it were, there'd just be a book. Someone would just read a book and teach, but we don't typically agree that, so.
Considering, and I really appreciate, Laura, you're sharing that perspective. One of the challenges is that we have seasoned people or people who do have that experience who are being asked, as was already shared, by their employer or by administrators, what's appropriate? What are you going to do? And I've even had people with the opposite side of, do we need you? Can we let you go?
Yeah.
And there's lots of different ways that this is happening because of this necessity for remote instruction. Right. And so there are different ways, I think, of it could be what's considered best practice. It could be guidelines, suggestions. Any term we use, whether it's standards or guide, they all have different implications. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's very important to be careful with the wording. But doing nothing at the moment seems like we're causing more challenge because there is a need. And
need. I mean, not to mention the stuff that we don't want kids and adults going 6, 8, 10, 12 a year without instruction. I mean, God, you get to be my age. If someone takes my training that I need away, good night, I may not be here a year from now. So you can't, and you take someone who's my age and I'm in that, I don't have the other comorbid conditions, but I'm old. So I fall into that 60 and up area for COVID. So I know, I think it's terribly important to be talking about. It's just got so many caveats to it.
Well, in terms of, I'm going to try to narrow this a little bit and maybe take just one slice at a time and see if that helps. In terms of having helpers, because I think for many of us, we're concerned about an individual that we're training working independently. And so having another human there to kind of support what we're saying, provide for additional safety, whatever it might be, or even to relay to us what that traveler is doing, so that if we can't view it through the phone or we can't hear it through the phone, we have a little bit of information. What do we think, can we think of some things that, let's say, categories of people, the uninitiated person or untrained person, what would be some possible things that they could do? And then what kind of training would we want for someone to do something much more in depth, like street crossings? Would we want something like, I'm just thinking of a young person who's traveling in their own neighborhood where the parent would be watching anyway. What do we want the parent to be aware of before they are assisting their child? Do we want them to be practicing sensory skills with them? Do we want them to be having close enough reach that they could go out and grab their shoulder? What types of things do we want to prepare them for? Just like if you're going to go tubing, the tubing company might say, well, before you get in the inner tube, make sure that you're aware that you can just put your feet down and stand up. Whatever it is, so that we can prepare that helper, whether it's a parent or a caregiver, to provide assistance and have a little bit of awareness that because we can't physically be there.
One thing I did, I had a fourth grader right before, I had him all year, but right before this started, we had been working on route travel near the school, corner familiarization. He was just about to begin, the quiet residential street crossing. So we were working on all that kind of thing. When we went to virtual learning, I had a couple of Zoom meetings with them and sent copies of the route that I had gone on Google Maps and just got the area of the neighborhood, highlighted the area that we'd be working, sent terminology to the parents, all the verbiage that I use with him. And then actually I invented it. I called it Car Stalker O&M. I got to the house and called Mom's phone. Mom had Bluetooth speakers on the boy, and he moved one head over so he could hear the traffic. That way I was in his ear. If he needed me, I could hear him, but she had proximity. So I would give him the direction. Okay, we're going to walk north to find the edge of the driveway, find the sidewalk. And when you find that, we're going to turn east. And then he'd repeat it back. He would go. If there was a problem, Mom was there to stop him, but my car was also right in front if I needed to block him from going into the street. It was a quiet neighborhood, so he was able to hear my car. So if he started turning up a driveway, I would just accelerate and drive by. Then I could turn around and drive back, giving him that traffic sound. So it actually worked out really, really nicely. Mom was able to see what he was doing. He was able to realize how much he was talking, because Mom would go, stop talking, stop talking, stop talking, which is what I usually do. So it turned out really to be a great experience. He was able to make that route. We talked about all the different sidewalks, that, all the different, basically landmarks, not really, I guess, but just the layout of his particular street, the layout of that long block versus that short block. He was actually able to make the full L route, get to that lamppost at the corner and line up on the ramp to cross the street.
I love that.
Once the restrictions kind of lifted a little bit in Texas, I'm in Lubbock.
Yeah.
I opted to park at his house and get out. Mom still walked with him, close to him, but I was probably 10 feet away. I had my mask on, I had my clipboard. He could hear me because I have a loud voice. Mm-hmm. And actually nothing really changed. So I think that worked really well. I've actually tried it with a couple of other students, but you have to have the parents on board. And I think that was the best part of all of this, was getting to work with the parents and getting them, oh, I didn't know my child could do this. And so.
Oh, I love that. And you need a hybrid, I guess, to do car stalker mobility.
I don't have one anymore, but.
Oh, that's great.
If you just park and turn it off, or yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Thank you.
But to go back to what you were talking about before, the key thing for me was to have the mom and the dad, because they took turns, know the verbiage, and understand that this is the I route, this is an L route, this is what we're doing, and they were so good.
So it was conceptual development for the parents as well, And then
Exactly.
that filters
And
to,
he already knew that. So the student already knew that we were doing an L route, and he already knows that. But the parents, it was all new to them. But I wanted to make sure that they understood what we were doing as well.
good.
Because I know they were going to practice it when I wasn't there, so I wanted to make sure they were doing it the right way.
Good. That's excellent. Okay. Anybody else? Other things that you've been doing or suggestions? In terms of what I'm going to just flip this to the other side, what you wouldn't feel comfortable with. What would you not feel comfortable doing remotely? And if so, why?
Chris, I just had a thought as far as like what standards would kind of look like or should look like. I would just think you would want to allow a lot of, I guess, discretion for the O&M, just given the variability of the students or adults that we work with. Because if you have a student of the same age and like same visual condition, and one student's going to be able to do one set of skills and another student's going to be able to do something else, where I wouldn't want there to be some expectation that someone else is going to say, well, this student should be able to do this skill. And then once you throw in like multiple disabilities and stuff like that.
I'm going to guess that the way this is going to have to develop is a little bit like the code of ethics, where we can't be so specific because you'll make things, you'll make hazards for people because they'll be tied in so tight. So they'll have to be very general, but I think what will also be helpful is to have scenarios, or here's an example of what might work. So that we could help people begin to think along the lines of, this is possible when you take these safety precautions. So just as Linda was sharing, it's possible to do some of these things with parents, but in order to do that, you want to do some pre-teaching with the parents. Or if you're going to do another activity, these are the ways that you want to make sure that it's safe. So having another family member go out and preview the router on the block before you take it, so that we're helping people to begin to go through the thought process of a risk assessment so that they can make reasonable precautions before the lesson is carried out. So I guess when I think of standards, it's kind of like, yes, you can do these things when you take these precautions for a client that this is appropriate for. There's going to be a lot of this that will just be professional judgment. When we did the, I forgetting all the places it came from, but I think the letter from ACVREP that went out, we suggested that in addition to doing your risk assessment, or as part of your risk assessment, you're running your ideas by other O&Ms. It's not a decision made in isolation. It's, hey, community, this is what I'm hoping to do. What am I missing? Have I considered all the perspectives? So that we're actually soliciting input from our fellows to know what might I not be aware of, so that we can make sure that the recipient, the client or the student, is as safe as possible.
Okay. Just real quick, the other thing that I was kind of thinking, as far as a student or client that you haven't actually worked with before, and either you have to do a limited assessment or some sort of virtual type assessment, I guess just thinking about that differently from a client that you've had much more instructional practice with.
Well, I know with some of the assessments that I've been asked to do during remote, I will just tell people at the outset that I won't decline service for anyone unless I can meet them face to face. If it's a clear indication that they need service, that's a lot easier, because I could put a little note at the end that I'll do an addendum to this report when we can meet face to face. But there's a clear need for orientation mobility. But I don't want to say that someone's not going to get any service when I can't even be there to kind of get the minute details. So I'm willing to say that yes, somebody does need service, but I wouldn't be willing to deny anyone service until I can really be doing the thorough assessment to say that I've literally checked everything. We put them in all these different scenarios because I can't do that remotely. But if someone appears to need it, I think that that's something we can do.
Well, I guess my thought was more all of these safety concerns that I haven't even thought about because I haven't worked with them
No, I
enough
understand.
to know
Sure. Yes, yes.
what those concerns should be.
And some of these I think are going to be, though it's a lot like everything, like, you know, use a white cup with dark coffee. It's common sense, but it's only common sense once you think of it. So hopefully the standards or the guidelines or the best practice would be ways just to get people to the point of going through a decision process to consider things. Like, did we think about this individual's balance? Did we think about their ability to have sensory input? So if we're talking about seniors and we know that their hearing is probably going to be disappearing along with their vision, not for everyone, but for many, it may not be something that somebody's going to think about right out of the box, but if we include it in considerations before performing remote assessment, then we can actually have that question asked to either the client or their family member or another related service provider to make sure that we're considering that before we ask them to do certain things. I think having some of those kind of what to think about before you do it would be helpful. Nora?
Oh, in regards to research, because HEAC has asked that we do research, and that when we look at remote instruction or telepractice or whatever you want to call it, everybody is using different terms, that we have evidence-based research to show that this is a viable service delivery model. And I know that I think it's Eileen Sifferman and Amy Parker are looking at case study research that would provide a lot of good information when it comes to some of the standards that would be helpful. Now, it takes a while to do that. That's part of the issue, is that it can take a couple years to do a research project and get it out, the data out, maybe preliminary data. An executive summary could go out quicker, but that's what they're looking at as well, because that will provide a lot of information. Who are you providing O&M services to remotely, and what does that client or student look like, and so forth, so on. So that's a really important piece, that qualitative piece that would provide us with a lot of information. The survey is a good beginning, but then you need the qualitative as well. And they're pursuing that. So it's part of that 38 member group, which is the Bill Kaler and Sarah Moreau and Amy Parker and Mary Kelvison. But I've put some information, but it's been interesting for me to delve into liability issues and looking at OT and PTs and telepractice. And it's interesting because if your state doesn't allow it, you shouldn't be doing it. I mean, if the related service personnel, the state laws say, you cannot do this, OT, PT, we shouldn't be doing it either. And that's a big question that's asked right off the bat by OT and PT professional development. That's the first thing they ask their practitioners to look at is, does your state allow it? And if it doesn't, then you're at real risk for liability issues.
And part of that, I think, as you said, depends on the terminology. So when we're working with adults, we might be considered more telehealth. But when we're working with school age, we might be considered more, I don't know if teleeducation is the way to put that, but we're the related service we're providing is not considered a therapy.
That's right.
Part of the reason we're not going to get money for it in the same way. But those are important. They aren't across the board. It's really age group specific, and knowing that the Department of Justice is not going to prosecute on some things as they would is helpful, but that doesn't necessarily say the same thing across all age groups.
That's right. I think we just have to be, I mean, we're learning from them because they're already doing it, you know.
Yes.
And we've also, the VA has done it for low vision.
Yes.
You know, and Buffalo VA Clinic has been doing it since 2012 or 2013, using telehealth in order to provide low vision services, both in assessment and practice intervention to their veterans, and it's been very successful. So it has, I think it has a place, definitely. Well, how at remote instruction, if we go with that, it has a place. And we're trying to figure out what that place is.
Right.
And Justin's research certainly will tell us what's going on.
And Justin, could you share a little bit more? I forgot to ask you again to.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So there was a survey that APH or AFB and APH and a bunch of other organizations kind of collaborated on. It was kind of headed by Penny Rosenblum, who's the director of research now at AFB. I keep confusing those. But basically, it included parents, it included TBIs, it included O&M specialists, basically everyone that's involved in school age, EI, those kind of services for kids. And it was, I believe the title was Access and Engagement. But basically we have over 1,600 participants, and
Amazing.
we should have a lot of data regarding O&M as far as O&M specialists and parents about how services are being provided, how it is affecting education. And there should be a report coming out sometime, hopefully in August, from AFB, kind of giving a executive summary and some important information to try to give guidance to the field. Just to summarize a little bit of what's in there, I mean, there's just about everything that you can imagine. There is some great things going on where people are finding really creative ways to adapt their instruction and getting much better connections with parents. There is a lot of families that are dealing with lack of technology, lack of internet, plenty of districts that are just not providing services because O&M doesn't seem to be a priority. And then I have seen things about like O&M specialists working with parents where the parent is using an iPhone to like video record the student doing some sort of travel techniques. And I mean, that's great, but I also kind of wonder about the liability issues there. So I think we will have some guidance and more information that will be coming out about that soon.
Thank you, Justin.
Mm-hmm.
And Nora, I don't know with research-based practices in terms of what's happening outside the US, and I don't know that it happens with all age groups, but in the Rome project in Australia, they have, I think with good impact and safety, been able to carry on their remote instruction using the assistant. And I reached out to them via email, but I haven't heard back, hoping to get some of their, just their standard documents that they would use to kind of recruit assistants or whatever they would be providing to a client's immediate circle, to know how they prime people to be that assistant, because they do basically send this set of equipment if somebody doesn't have it. They send the smartphone, the camera, you know, there's a camera lens that makes it like a fisheye lens so they have a better view. They send the chest harness. When, as Linda was describing the car scenario, instead of just the young person having the audio input, the assistant would as well. So you've basically got a three-way call with the instructor, the O&M instructor, the assistant, and the traveler. And so that's a different model than I think many people have used here in the US, but it allowed them to work in a team, basically a network team through the video conferencing software. And so hopefully we can kind of bring in other people who have been doing these things, whether it's, I've forgotten, is it Sarah Morrell in Alaska?
Mm-hmm.
And,
Moreau.
Thank you, Moreau. And so
Moreau, Moreau.
Moreau,
But it's through Amy Parker because she was one of Amy's students.
Yes, yes. And all these things, I imagine that Amy probably gets more of the rural areas like Montana and other things, but these are also the same things that universities might use in order to monitor folks who couldn't be at an internship placement. So that rather than having a university person have to fly to all these different rural places, or for those that can't find someone to work directly with to supervise their internship, this might be a way to have that be possible. Justin and Nora, are you having any use case scenarios with that where university students are using remote services other than just training that's, you know, on a class that's distance education?
Justin?
I mean, we did a summer program this year because normally we have like a 3-week summer program for transition kids every summer, and that's on a state grant. So we still did that virtually, and we had, normally I would have 3 interns that do probably like 200 hours as part of that. So they definitely got a lot less hours, but we still did a limited number of O&M instruction hours each week. I still got hours for some interns, although it was very limited. You're kind of dependent on when the kids actually show up, how much they feel like sitting on Zoom all day, that kind of stuff. But I mean, there wasn't really advanced travel or things beyond kind of like concept development or looking at maps or kind of talking through, okay, you're going to University of Louisville in the fall, let's talk through that bus route or whatever kind of skills they might need. So it hasn't been advanced at all. And I'm still trying to figure out internship stuff for the 8 students that got internships canceled this summer.
Yeah. Internship's a problem.
I think it's been a problem regardless of whether we could physically be somewhere or not, and it's only escalated now.
And we have a few people that actually went physically out of state and provided direct service. One just finished up at a rehab center, and she was willing to do that, and that worked out because it was a regular internship but less clients at the facility using PPE. And AER, University Review Committee, allows you to do not necessarily travel to see the intern as long as they send in 4 videotapes. So they're able to, that has been for a long time, the situation. We normally go to visit if we can, but no travel was allowed at Texas Tech. I mean, we couldn't travel after March 15th.
Do they have an O&M with them providing as the kind of the master teacher model, or is it like
I mean, it was like a regular internship placement site.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing was they had only 1 O&M because they're getting rid of the other ones.
Right. Would you all?
They were closed for a while and then they reopened. And the rehab center, and it's one we used for years, and they had very few clients, but children and adults, and so they used PPE. And the person was, the female intern was supervised by the seasoned O&M specialist.
Now that we have some of these remote systems in place, would you all be willing or able to do placements where there wasn't another comms in order to provide that internship supervision, so that another, let's say a PT or an OT or an administrator was the kind of supervising person?
The detriment to that is it's not included in the university standards. And so we have to be really careful. Justin, you can address it by what we allow to happen within the university training program, as well as ACVREP.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be possible, but I would have serious reservation just because I've had plenty of students where I think that would work out fine, but I've also had ones where without that extra support and supervision, that they would not succeed, and I wouldn't feel terribly comfortable even with the kind of safety issues and that kind of stuff.
One thing is that if you're doing, let's say, a mapping lesson with a child inside the home environment, over Zoom, in order for the intern or the instructor, you have to be very careful in the language you use. And if you're capturing it, you can go back and say, did I use the correct vocabulary to have the child respond in a certain manner? And so in some ways, it's a more positive learning tool when you're videotaping yourself over Zoom and then going back and looking at it.
Yep.
And you can learn a lot from that. So I see it as a very positive way. There is a place for it.
Is it possible?
And we will be using it, I'm sure.
Is it possible to have, just as a scenario here, if I'm here at Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and there's someone who has to be in another area providing instruction, whether it's remote or I guess face-to-face, but I, as the intern supervisor, am jumping on remotely. Is that something that you all are using?
I could see that happening, yeah.
Yeah.
So in other words, I'd still be the supervising intern,
Right.
but when the lessons occur, my virtual self is there, not the human self.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Well, I think we're about down to the end here. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And I think we have a long way to go in figuring out what this is going to look like. But if we keep working at it, I think we're going to have some shape to it. Are there things that you would like, if you aren't participating in that kind of, I don't know what to call it, working group or focus group, are there things that you would like shared with that group that you have as concerns or suggestions?
I think the risk assessment might be good for people to have if they would like it.
Others?
I think I'm also curious if people have like liability waivers that they've kind of come up with specific to COVID or specific to remote instruction.
Right.
I can't remember, Justin, but it was on a call where there were, I think it was the HEAC, where we met with the universities, and there were a couple of universities that were in the process with their legal counsel developing that.
I think so. I think that might have been.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was, but at the university, for Kane class, they were going to have students sign a waiver.
Oh,
but
that's
you know, they were working out with general counsel that dealt with COVID. But the issue is, it doesn't matter. If you sign a waiver, it doesn't mean you can't still try to sue.
It's true too.
You know, so I don't know, but they are doing that. And I want to get a copy if I have to be doing King class next summer, which I will be, but if COVID's still an issue.
Yeah.
I want to see anything and everything that's going to help out.
Well, hopefully we can start sharing resources, and when we find things that are helpful. I learned a lot from everybody sharing this evening, and hadn't realized that things were happening in lots of different ways, like when Maggie shared about leader dogs, and I'm going to be a little more cautious when I'm driving my car now near a student, now that I know that it can be considered stalking. But lots of great ideas. I appreciate everybody's input very much. Thank you. And I hope everybody has a terrific rest of their evening. And thank you again for being here to celebrate our award winners and to share some discussion too. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. A great meeting. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Justin. Everybody.
Bye, Nora. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks to our captioner too. Thank you, Marianne.
Bye, Gayla. Thank you.
I have a lot of people who are interested in watching the recording of Nora getting her award.
I don't know the details yet, but as soon as I can share it, I will, Linda.
Oh,
Okay, I just didn't know where it was going to be. That was my question.
I don't know yet either, but
Okay.
Zoom will make a recording, and then once we have a way to store it somewhere and send it out, we'll do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Night, night.